And unfortunately, we're just stuck in the mud at the moment because we've got to, cleanse ourselves of the mistakes that were made, with too much money supply, lower cost of funding, too much money put into obsolescence. We're going to get through this period, and it's just going to be fabulous where we're going to go after this.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show, the home of Googlization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy shift going on all around us and explore the disruptive convergence of technology, business, and people. Here are your hosts, Ira Wolf and Jason Cochran.
Hey, welcome everyone to a very special episode of Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, a show from the People Forward Network. I'm Ira Wolf, and thank you for being part of Googlization Nation.
And I'm Jason Cochran. If you think this is just another podcast, think again. We're the voice of the most important and crucial conversations that are confronting business leaders and people in today's ever-changing world. Our goal is to bring you ways to reimagine tomorrow and explore the impact and the convergence of business, people, and technology.
If there is any doubt we are living in never normal times, all you need to do is turn on the news or strike up a conversation over a coffee about the jobs, labor, and the economy. For most of our recent history, when inflation went up, the economy slowed, demand fell, companies cut back, employees lost their jobs, unemployment went up. That was typical. That was normal. Well, welcome to 2022, when nothing seems to be working the way we thought it should or would. So we are honored and grateful to welcome a few experts to the show to help us figure this out, to help us make us smarter, to see what's going to go on. Are we headed toward recession? What is going to happen with jobs, the markets? First of all, we've got Dick Bove. He might be a familiar face to many of you. He's been on television well over 1,500 times. You might have seen him on Bloomberg, CNBC, Fox Business, CNN. If you don't watch TV, you missed him on TV. You probably saw his name in over 10,000 interviews in print media. Dick is the chief financial strategist at Odeon Capital Group and a highly sought after thought leader for investors, the media, and even the White House. Joining Dick is Matt Van Alstyne, co-founder and managing partner of Odeon Capital Group, a leading Wall Street executive. Matt and Dick team up each week on the podcast Odeon Capital Conversations, known for their well-informed outlook and views, which is now one of the top-rated podcasts. And we're going to hear in a minute, also joining us is John Aidan Byrne. John is an award-winning journalist, multimedia editor, host of the popular podcast Dig Life Deep, which I have a regular segment on there, Future Shock. Hopefully that you're listening to that as well. And he's also host and moderator of the Odeon Capital Conversation, which, as I said just a minute ago, is one of the top-rated podcasts. I believe it's in the top 30 on Apple. If you haven't been listening to either of these podcasts, I highly recommend it. And also check out my Future Shock 2.0 segment each week on Dig Life Deep. Let's just get started here. And I'm going to bring in Dick, and I'm going to bring in Matt, and I'm going to bring in John, and welcome to Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, gentlemen.
Thank you. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
John, I'm going to throw this to you first. You started Odeon Capital Conversations. You're only into it 33 episodes. And what's your secret? You're somewhere, you need the top of the charts.
Well, certainly flattered. The secret is the excellent contributions of Dick Bove and Matt Van Alstyne, two well-informed Wall Street veterans. Dick has covered the banking industry for decades. As you said, he's been quoted in media multiple times, and Matt has a really well-informed view. We pick out the right topics each week that we're specializing in: interest rates, monetary policy, jobs, banks. We even covered student loans recently, and in the latest episode, a bit of a teaser here, we look at Goldman Sachs, why workers have been asked to return to work. So a lot of different reasons, but we're delighted to bring it to our audience.
And it's wonderful to be here. So you already you threw the one boulder into the pond, John. So we want to get the opinion on what's going on at Goldman Sachs. I mean, I've brought this up several times. The trend is certainly moving to hybrid work. We've got a lot of our audience is our business leaders, HR leaders, speaking at a lot of conferences. The issue of bringing people back to work or developing a hybrid workplace, a remote workplace, an everywhere workplace, as we call it, and yet the two leading CEOs, Jamie Dimon and Elon Musk, who's in the news all the time, they're saying everybody has to come back to work or you're fired. So, Dick, you have some insights into what's going on, and I guess we can ask you if it's going to work and where you think the everywhere workplace is headed.
Well, I think that the basic problem that you're seeing with Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, I don't know Elon Musk's situation at all, but is that business is really lousy. In other words, if you take a look at what's been happening in the investment banking industry over the last few months, the declines have been, startling. They're so huge. In other words, things like, equity offerings are off 75%. This past couple of months on a year-over-year basis. Mergers and acquisitions are down 75%. High yield, offerings are down 81%. So what these companies are experiencing is a tremendous decline in their business, and they have decided, I think very correctly, that the best way to stimulate, this business again is you got to get everybody back to the office. You've got to get them working together. You've got to get them on the phone. You've got to be supervising their activity. You've got to be watching what they're doing, who they're going with in terms of meeting with clients, in the evening or what have you. So I think that Goldman Sachs, I hesitate to use the word frightened, but I think that they're very frightened by what they're seeing in the market right now, because the expectation is that the Federal Reserve will make it even tighter, make the business even tougher. So they've got to get their people back, and they've got to get them going, and that's the reason for bringing these people back into the office.
I just want to put a reminder out for anyone who's listening. If you have a question for Dick or Matt or John, please, you can enter them into the comments. We can follow those. So if you're watching on YouTube or watching on LinkedIn, put them in the comments, and we'll try to get them. If not, we'll make sure Dick and Matt get them afterwards and can respond to them. So Dick, we've got mostly, and Matt, both of you, I want to hear from you. Most of our audience is HR, human resource, consultants, coaches, and as well as business leaders of small, medium-sized businesses. And I'm sure we may have a few larger people representing larger enterprises. How does this impact this? Where's it going? Are JP Morgan and Tesla, are they the exceptions? How do you see remote work, hybrid work, affecting the labor markets down the road?
Well, I actually think that people will be coming back to the office in most instances, because I think the nature of employment is about to change. By that I mean we've come through a cycle in which consumerism, technology, has allowed people to work away from the office. Just the remarkable things like Zoom, et cetera, have allowed them to communicate with each other pretty effectively. However, I think what we're seeing in terms of the decline in the market, the weakness in the economy, is basically a shifting in the nature of the U.S. economy, and basically, I think in other countries also, away from consumerism, planned obsolescence in business, toward more basic businesses. I think we're going back to manufacturing. I think we're going to go into natural resource development, despite the pollution issues related there. I think the defense industry is going to be significantly bolstered. And I think banking is going to be necessary to fund the growth in those sectors. So I think the nature of the jobs in the businesses that I mentioned require being in place in the unit in the office or in the factory or what have you, as opposed to be working, at home or someplace, away from the office. And by the way, to show you I'm somewhat of a hypocrite, I work from home.
Just to put this out and be real, I mean, we talk, certainly remote work, hybrid work, this whole conversation where we started is focused on remote work. But at this point in time, even if we had 100% of people who were eligible who can possibly do their jobs remotely, it's still only 40% of the workforce. 60% of jobs, at least at this point, without virtual reality and some increased automation, which we can talk about, are still have to be done in person. There's some healthcare, things like healthcare that can be done remotely. Even some surgeries can be done remotely, but it's not commonplace. So we're only talking about 40% of the workplace that can possibly do it. And, we all are privileged that we have that opportunity to be able to do that. But there's many jobs. I still can't get my trash collected as they came by this morning and have it done remotely. Maybe in the future, we'll be able to figure that out. There's every day there seems to be a big story about layoffs. Again, most of them seem to be in tech, but Snap the other day said they're laying off 20% of their workplace. Google's laid off, Apple's laid off, Meta's laid off. The list just goes on and on. Is that reflective of the general economy? The new numbers came out. It looked like many industries increased.
Well, I think it is. It's certainly reflective of the general economy in one regard. As I say, a shift in the nature of where business is going to be done. But I also think that the structure of the employment market at the moment would imply, I think, that layoffs are going to continue. And by that I mean, if we look at productivity. In manufacturing, productivity is actually improving, but in business in general, productivity has been decreasing for the last couple of quarters, and it's decreasing because we've added a lot of people. They're working fewer hours, and we're paying them more money. So basically, if you're a corporation or a small business and you've added a few people because you're afraid that you're not going to get workers because you hear about 2 jobs available for every one person out there willing to take it. But what you're finding is that maybe you hired too many people, number one. Maybe the nature of your business isn't going to be as great as it was over the past decade. Maybe, you're working fewer hours, which means that your production is down. And if all of that is true, and I think it is true, we're going to see more layoffs. And I think, this whole concept of, we're adding jobs very rapidly is going to dissipate, and we're going to be looking at a shift in the employment numbers, which is going to be very unpleasant.
So, which brings up a question. Do some of the metrics that we've been using for the last 50 years, I guess, do they need to be changed? I mean, how we measure productivity, which leads to a second question here, because you recently talked about the Labor Department numbers are sort of a head fake. And we hear that a lot, that are they really measuring what we need to be measuring? So we're measuring productivity based on the amount of output versus the number of people that are working. But at the same time, there's a lot of people have gig jobs. They have second jobs. They have third jobs. They're sort of off the radar.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, just to give you one simple example, and Matt brought this up so that, I should actually let him talk about it, but the birth-death rate in the labor numbers is staggering. In other words, we added over 300,000 jobs in the last number that came out. And if I looked at the numbers right, the birth-death rate added 100,000 of those jobs. That was 1/3. But maybe Matt wants to comment about the last couple of reports, because basically this will give you an idea of how skewed this job number can be.
Well, the birth-death rate has been a controversial part of the unemployment number for, going on decades at this point, because every time what they supposedly try to do, and we call it the birth-death rate because that's what they call it. It's kind of a somber name for it, but it's basically their guesstimate of people who started new businesses that aren't yet reflective in federal data like the U.S. Census or aren't able to be captured by the current metrics. The problem with it is every year they go back 12 months later and revise what the birth death rate was, and consistently going back decades, the birth death rate overstates employment. And so it's a problem. That said, and to answer your question of do we need to change the metrics, there's two issues. One is is the metric consistent? Because what you're really measuring is, change. As long as you're using a consistent metric and it's capturing the directional change, then directionally it's probably going to be right, even though maybe mathematically it's not, perfectly accurate. As long as it's consistent and they're honoring the statistics that they're using, so month to month you're getting, you're able to do a comparison from prior periods. The second part is comparing yourself to other countries and other regions that have different types of statistics, and then you're trying to compare, how is America's GDP versus like China's GDP? Well, it's really hard to tell because they have a completely different calculation. They use real estate in a different way that we don't. They use projections in a way that we don't. So it's country to country, when you don't have consistent numbers, it's really hard to compare. But in terms of measuring the U.S. economy, the before and after, as long as it's consistent, I'm pretty sure that that's the measurement that Wall Street wants to look at and take care of. The real problem with the birth death rate versus, because you have two different agencies that measure the unemployment number, the job gains, which is produced by the BLS, and then you have the unemployment rate, which is part of the census data. And lots of times when they're not consistent, like they haven't been the last couple of months, it sure looks like the job numbers are weakening, even though we have strong headline BLS numbers. And so this is when it gets confusing because, we have a very low unemployment rate, but it sure looks and appears like the job market is softening if you look at the census data instead of looking at the BLS data.
So Matt and certainly Dick, looking to you for your perspective on this too. We've had we have these job openings, and I agree that many of the job openings that people posted were never intended. It's almost they never intended to be filled. People just
Right.
create these jobs, and if we grow, we're going to fill them if we can find the people, and it continues. And so a lot of those are fake. But But a lot of the numbers that we're looking at don't have. We just don't have the bodies. We just don't have the skilled labor. Our labor participation rate is low. Certainly, there may be another side to the story, but like your comment on that, male participation rate has been falling for 70 years, according to BLS. Where do we go with that? If even if we don't have the growth, the job growth, can we still fill these jobs? Or how do we fill these jobs? I know that's what our audience is looking for. How do we fill the jobs that we do have open?
Well, I think the issue is training. In other words, I think we've pulled this huge scam on the youth of America, in that we tell them, in order to get a job, you need to get a college education. And then you go to college, you build up a huge amount of debt, and you attempt to get a job when you graduate, and the job market looks at you and says, well, what do you know? What can you do? And they can tell you what Sophocles said. Maybe they can tell you, what some other, type of esoteric information is. But, can they run a lathe? Can they, build a house? Can they use their hands in a fashion that will create value? I don't think so. And I don't think they've been trained to do that. So I think that you really do have to start with the educational system and start to rebuild vocational training. I mean, I think I heard Jamie Dimon say this correctly about 6 months ago. I think he said that JP Morgan Chase is no longer going to make donations to colleges, named colleges. It's going to make the donations instead to vocational schools and to schools which are oriented toward providing workers, for the economy. And I think, you start there. I think the second point is that if you're an employer and you feel a need for people, you have to train them. if you're not going to train them, in other words, if you think you're going to get them, popping out of the job market or popping out of colleges, I think you're mistaken. I think you've got to have a decent method of bringing people in, training them, and then, building their loyalty and them as part of your workforce. And I think, again, going to where I think the U.S. economy is going in the next few years, I think that's going to be critical, because you can't drop someone into manufacturing or into mining or into defense, and assume that they know how to do what is required of them. So again, I long-winded answer to the question. I think the college system has got to be revised dramatically. I think it's failed American youth, and it's failing our economic system. I think that training has got to be added at all levels of the system.
Not long-winded at all. We hang on every word you say.
Thank you.
Hey, John, I think you had I know you had a comment or some opinion.
Well, no, I agree with what Dick says. You put it extremely well. I mean, there are also just these structural problems in our labor force. I mean, like from the simple to the profound. I mean, I was shocked the other day when somebody mentioned to me that to be a florist in America, you need to have a license. I mean, it's just extraordinary. To be a tour guide, you have to go and apply for a license. So you're paying up there twice, and it slows down, the availability of all these workers. There's another thing that we covered on my podcast, Ira, the whole underground gig economy. And I think that hasn't been as transparent in the numbers out there as it should be. I mean, there are just so many Americans in the gig or underground economy. We don't even know, maybe as many as 40 or 50 million freelancers, and they're probably not adequately counted in the labor numbers. And maybe that's something that Dick could address.
Well, basically, the household. I mean, Matt just mentioned that we do two surveys. One is the, establishment survey, in which supposedly 131,000 establishments are culled every month, and the question is asked, are you hiring people? How many people do you have working for you? And then the second survey is done of 60,000 households, and the question there is, do you have a job? So the net effect is, if people are answering the questionnaires on the household survey correctly, we're picking up those people who are working off the record, so to speak, in the gig economy. If those people are afraid to say, I have a job, because they're worried if the government is asking them if they have a job, the next person who'll be asking them that question is the IRS, then you're not picking it up. You're not able to get it. But this economy has been around for decades, right? In other words, the underground economy surfaced in the 1960s and 1970s as something that, the American, if you will, demographers were missing, that the people who were creating the GDP numbers were missing, and there's been a real effort by the government to categorize and to quantify what's going on in that sector. But, I mean, since it is underground and we don't know who they are, we can't say whether they've been more successful in ferreting out, what these people are producing that adds to GDP, or B, whether they're in fact working 60 hours a week. That we don't know. But you can't fault the government for not trying, because they are trying very hard to do that. In addition to which, if you've noticed, the reports coming out of the Labor Department each month, the Labor Department keeps seeking new ways of finding people who are in different categories so that they can properly indicate what the unemployment rate is. In other words, under something that they call U3, and it doesn't matter what it is, they say the unemployment rate is 3.5%. On something else, which they call U6, which takes in all of these different, people, all of these different, people who weren't being counted in the past, the unemployment rate is 7%. So, we can't nail down the numbers the way we would like, I think is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I would point out that the government, I think, is trying to. The U6 number is commonly called the underemployment rate because it counts people who are working part-time that wish they were working full-time in addition to people who are seeking employment altogether. But going back on the gig economy, and this is a criticism of the latest BLS number. Dick said about 100,000 of the 300,000 jobs created last month were from the estimate of the birth death rate. But of the other 200,000 jobs, close to another 100,000 of those were people who were taking second jobs, and they get counted as quote unquote new jobs because their primary job isn't making them enough money. And then the other part of that is people who are in part-time jobs who wish they were in full-time jobs, which is also counted in that 100,000. So when you get rid of all the noise, the job number last month was closer to sub 100,000 of people who got full-time jobs. And then you start looking at what sectors they were in, and they were in kind of retail and transitory type jobs that aren't exactly the type that you would aspire to if you want a full-time long career that has growth prospects. And so part of it is they do try to measure it. And I'm kind of consistent in believing that as long as the measurement is consistent from period to period, you'll be capturing the change. The last thing I'd say on the whole unemployment thing is the Federal Reserve has been pretty darn clear that what they're trying to do, because they have no other tools to increase supplies, is they want to reduce demand, and the price of reducing demand is reducing full-time employment. Yeah. And it seems like it's the goal to reduce employment, albeit it sure feels like the BLS is trying to delay that number from showing up in the data until possibly after the election, is my theory.
Well, the household number actually showed an increase of 344,000 people who are now unemployed. In other words, we showed a big increase in employment. We also showed a big increase in unemployment in terms of the way they calculate all these different subsectors of the numbers. So that I believe we've peaked in terms of the job market. I believe that we're going to see unemployment start to rise. I believe that there's going to be a major retraining that has to be done as we move, as I say, from these technology-oriented situations to the manufacturing, defense, et cetera, industries. So I think that we're in a state of turmoil, not just because people are working at home or working in the office, but because the industries that are going to be hiring are going to be a lot different, and the industries that are going to be letting people go are ones that we know well, in fact, may have invested a lot of money in because they're the hot names in the stock market. And I think, Ira, you mentioned a whole bunch of layoffs from companies that supposedly are the darlings of the stock market. The game is changing. We're in a separated economy where we've created, as a result of this war in Ukraine, we've created two segments of the world economy, and we have gone away. If you don't object, in 1990, when the Soviet Union fell apart and free trade opened up, and there was free flow of money, free flow of people, free flow of goods, what you saw was, a shifting in where, if you will, manufacturing was going to be done, where raw materials would come from. Well, that's now gone. It's gone. We are not going to rely on Asia for the manufactured goods that we use. We are not going to rely on China for rare earths or for the chemicals that go into the drugs that we take. We are going to start doing that stuff here. And that means a different type of job, a different type of industry, a different type of opportunity. And it means where the game is now ending. And I think, therefore, if you're in the human resources business, you're well aware of the fact that you're not getting demands for more people if you're in these industries which I say are going to be phased down, and you are getting huge demands for people if you're in the industries which are attempting to grow as fast as they can.
Richard, you kind of touched on it. You alluded to it. How much of what we're going through right now is maybe just part of the growth curve of innovation? That we're going through a period of trying to adjust to all of this change in terms of even generational changes, in terms of what millennials and Gen Zs think in terms of work and how it fits in their life and what types of work they want to do, along with are certain companies starting to think through AI and automation and things like that. How much do you see maybe part of this being part of the growth curve, that the economy really is going to change, and this isn't just a blip on the radar, but maybe we're entering a new world of normal in terms of how we think about the economy?
Yeah, I think we are, Jason. I think that, basically what we are doing right now is we're in this adjustment, right? The adjustment is that the Federal Reserve has got to kill inflation, which means that they're going to, as Matt said, they're going to increase unemployment. They're going to slow down the economy. And therefore, people are reacting to the adjustment. What they should be doing is exactly what you said. They should be thinking about what will the structure of the new economy in the United States be, and how can I benefit or participate in what that new structure is? And I think that, if we're going to succeed in manufacturing, it has got to be because we have used technology effectively, robotics, to lower the cost of producing goods so that these goods can be sold globally at very effective competitive prices. And that's going to be an area of tremendous opportunity. I mean, the jobs number last month showed it again, that's where the new jobs are coming from. That's where a lot of the new jobs are coming from. And also, the jobs numbers are showing that there is a demand for people in manufacturing. There is the government employment numbers didn't go up, but they're going to go up because defense needs are going to go up enormously. We're still having this huge battle over fossil fuels because the green people believe that they're not colored green, but the Greens believe that basically we can fulfill the energy needs of a growing economy with windmills and solar and lithium batteries and storage. But the fact is we can't. We've got to have fossil fuels. And in order to effectively use fossil fuels, we've got to use technology to make the carbon dioxide not as bad as it is in terms of affecting the planet. So, we're on the verge of an area of great opportunity, of great, growth in terms of where the jobs are coming from, of where the economy can grow. And unfortunately, we're just stuck in the mud at the moment because we've got to, cleanse ourselves of the mistakes that were made, with too much money supply, lower cost of funding, too much money poured into obsolescence. We're going to get through this period, and it's just going to be fabulous where we're going to go after this.
Following up on that, we spoke about this on our latest episode of Odeon Capital Conversations, episode 33, Robotics, IT. And anecdotally, we were just sharing notes about how in the past few months, it seems as if the grocery retail sector has been accelerating the introduction of self-service checkout and robotics technology. We don't have, hard numbers on it, but that would seem to be the case. And on that same point, with the right balance, technology can enhance productivity clearly. Dick has a lot of data on this, how the number of banks branches, the physical brick and mortar branches, have been in decline throughout America. And yet employment overall, headcount in the banking sector has been at a record high recently. And a lot of those jobs are well-paid middle-class IT jobs. So done right and with the right balance, technology can be a huge productivity enhancer. We don't want to be Luddites, and the proper balance, we could move in the right direction.
Yeah. I mean, we need technology. We need technology to lower the cost of manufacturing. We need technology to clean the emissions that fossil fuel creates. We need technology perhaps more now than ever. And we have it. We have the ability to do these things because, as I say, the economy is going to be going in this new direction, and we need technology to facilitate that move and to make it most effective.
I want to be cautious of everybody's time here. I know we all got busy schedules, including everybody who's listening. There's a couple elephants in the room that we need to address. And one is, I know, on top of mind, and especially with, I just read the Fed's thinking of another 0.75 increase. As you noted, that's a way to bring inflation under control, get the economy okay. It's going to increase employment two questions. One is, our GDP, at least currently, seems to be detached from employment, at least from looking at the numbers. In the past 70 years, we've had 12 recessions, I think, and in each case, unemployment usually went up to 6%. But some of the economists, some of the things I've been reading, say the highest that's going to go up is maybe 4.6, 4.7%. Matt, Dick, do you agree with that? Do you although we agree unemployment is going to go up, is it going to go up where it historically was? And then, obvious question out there: are we headed toward? Are we officially going to be in a recession? Beyond the 2 quarters, because I know there's some controversy with that. So,
I think it's hard to argue that the Fed is not done. They're going to continue to increase interest rates. They're going to continue to liquidate their balance sheet if you believe them, and that we're looking probably at a sustained level of unemployment if they're successful in getting inflation down via the tools they have. I think the hedge to that would be if for some reason supply comes back online and the world gets better, and you could see inflation drop naturally, they might reverse course quickly and luck themselves into a soft landing. But I don't know where anyone's coming up with these estimates saying that there's going to be 4.7% unemployment. Like, it's asinine to if you're that good at predicting things, you should be doing something else with your time, because you become very, very rich.
I think if you take a look at the 1970s and the mistake that Arthur Burns made, the head of the Fed at that time, is that he started to fight inflation. And then we ran into this massive recession, 73, 75, which was enormous relative to, I apologize, which was enormous relative to, any recession that we had since the Depression. So, Burns panicked and he stopped tightening and he started easing on inflation, and he never went back to it. And then we got this guy, G. William Miller, who, further, eased monetary policy, and inflation was off to the races until Paul Volcker stopped it. But the fact is that if we believe him, Powell understands what happened then. Powell understands that you can't, take the first indication of a decline in prices or commodity prices and say, oh, inflation is beaten. We can now go back to the old game. And therefore, I do not think this Fed is going to ease up for the next 12 to 18 months. And I think as a result of that what we're going to see is unemployment rise to a higher number. What the number is, I don't know. It's going to be a higher number. It's going to be unpleasant. People are going to be upset about it. It's going to have political ramifications. But hopefully, this guy is not going to blink. He's not going to, shift back to easy monetary policy, which is what he did a couple of years ago. He's going to stay with it. We're going to defeat inflation, and we can start, if you will, this new era.
I would point out you could have rising jobs at the same time you have rising unemployment if the Fed is doing their job, because in theory, what they're trying to do is navigate, the inflation number, which is, the demand side. And it's possible that the number of people looking for work exceeds the number of people getting jobs. At the same time, job growth is continuing because of the labor needs of the businesses. So two things could be true that we'd be looking at. You could see an increased employment while seeing a dramatically increased unemployment rate.
Yeah, let me just add here also, and Dick has research on this. I guess it could be considered a hopeful sign. During the pandemic, Americans saved a lot more, and savings in bank deposits just accelerated. I think at one point there was an extra 2-point-something trillion in bank accounts. And now banks are sitting on this record amount of deposits, and it's there to be loaned out to manufacturing, which apparently America has created over 600,000 manufacturing jobs, I guess, since President Biden took office. So that manufacturing shift is there. The money is at the banks to lend out. And I think, Dick, you've been seeing evidence of that.
Yeah, no, that is one of the reasons to argue that it will be a soft landing, because basically the banking system of the United States is just sitting on this massive amount of excess cash. I mean, hundreds of billions of dollars. We have banks now which are over $1 trillion, over a couple of $1 trillion in size, and those banks have about $1 trillion. JP Morgan, about $1 trillion in cash-like instruments already. So the money is there to fund the type of things that we're talking about, and I do think it's going to happen.
One question, and then we've got to lead toward wrapping this up, although I can be here all day if you guys are willing. But if we try to wrap this up in just the next few minutes, I guess the one factor that I have, and I'm going to throw this out to you, Matt, because when you started talking about the birth death number, I was thinking you were talking about the fertility rate. And the fact is that in 1960 we had 3.6 babies born, and now we have 1.6 babies born per family. The challenge is that we now have baby boomers retiring. When we look at our labor market, we have baby boomers retiring. We have virtually very little immigration, or at least an anti-immigration policy. And if we look at the impact of those birth rates, in the 60s, in the late 50s and 60s, we had 2.5 million new baby boomers flooding the market every year for about 10 years. And then in the 90s, early 2000s, we had 2.5 million millennials entering the market. They're just bodies, but we had a lot of opportunity. We're looking now at 400,000 to 500,000 new workers because of the lower birth rate, because of low immigration, and at the same time the baby boomers are going out. So I guess that's where my question was coming from, with the lower unemployment in this recession, that it's not going to be that typical high rate. And Matt, as you said, we had higher job growth. We could have job growth and higher unemployment. I guess that's the mitigating factor, I'm thinking. Am I off base, or?
It's a dark way of looking at the world if you want to start doing numbers. First off, the Social Security funding crisis, which is not on anyone's radar, is a disaster, because they're increasing the amount that is being paid out this year. I think it's 9.8%. So call it 10%. And the rule of 7 says that means Social Security, if we keep that going, the cost will double in the next 7 years, unless they get inflation under control. Already you're sitting at a federal government that's basically, if you include Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security and interest, so basically the 4 things that you cannot get rid of as a government, already are about 90% of the federal tax receipts. If you keep adding 10% to Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security every year, it's going to be about 100% by 2024. And then the rest is deficit borrowing. I mean, the numbers don't work. That said, you talked about the demography of America and how it's getting older, and we're not being replaced with workers. Well, the solution is immigration. We have to change our immigration, and that could actually probably be done rapidly under the right leadership if needed. And then the other point is, if you look around the world and America's in really bad shape, which I agree. We've got too few immigrants, too few children, but we do have an immigration opportunity because people want to come here. We are not the worst country. China, their demography problem is way worse. They are already a shrinking society. They're aging something like 0.7 years per every year that goes by. Their average age is pushing mid-40s. Our average age is around 36. You look at Germany, same thing. Their average age is getting older. They have a very top-heavy age demographic. Their average birth replacement rate, I believe, is below 1. And they don't have the immigration problem that we have, because people don't want to necessarily go there, and they aren't necessarily letting people in. Japan also has a problem. And so when you start looking around the world, and you try to say, okay, clearly the US has problems. Clearly it's going to be worse 5 years from now than it is the last 5 years. We're still better off than every other country that's part of the G7. And I forgot to mention Russia. Russia is also extremely top heavy. And, if you're trying to get into the head of Vladimir Putin, and no one's ever said it, but it sure seems like part of the motivation for going into Ukraine is full of young people. And maybe they're trying to solve a demographic problem there as well. But yeah, there's a lot of problems, and it takes serious leaders, and we don't have serious leaders right now, and we don't seem to have serious leaders on the horizon. It's a very vexing and frustrating problem if you want to be a believer in the United States. That said, we're better than everyone else, so if you're going to bet your money, you're going to bet on America.
Matt, you just set up our follow-up show here at today, our live stream at 1 p.m. We're talking about the future of leadership. And our guest, which is Paul McCarthy, is like, we need a new model. We need a new approach to leadership.
Yeah. I mean, by the way, who wants to go become part of the leadership? I mean, look at what the political process does to you as a person. You have to be really thick-skinned and basically emotionally strong to avoid the attacks and have the competence to do it. And then when you get there, you have to kind of herd cats to get any bill that would make any difference across the finish line. It's a really frustrating as a voter.
It's tough. And Dick, you're an incredibly busy man. I don't know if that was the White House trying to call you and get some advice after listening to our show, but I know we've got influence, and John and I both have top-rated podcasts, and Jason, but we really appreciate you being here. We always close our show with one thing, and I know there's a billion more topics, literally, that we can bring up, but we always like to go around and ask our guests, is there one thing that we should have asked you that we didn't? So, Dick, I'm going to come to you first. Is there something we should have asked you but didn't?
Well, I think the only thing that we could have talked about that I'm very interested in right now is the shrinking of the Federal Reserve balance sheet, because I don't think raising interest rates really kill inflation. You've got to destroy liquidity in order to destroy demand, and therefore we really have to take a very close look at what the Fed is doing with its balance sheet, because that's the key to whether we're going to get rid of this inflation or not, in my view.
Well, and you have an open invitation. Anytime you want to come back and talk about that, you can do that, or you can go up to Odeon Capital Conversations and catch that, because I know John and Dick and Matt will be talking about that every week. Matt, what's your what did we not ask that we should have?
I think the biggest source of inflation going forward is going to be the cost of energy and the cost of increasing energy, or if we're going to live with rolling blackouts, rolling brownouts, because we're converting to a greener energy supplies while not necessarily keeping up the fossil fuels, which is the ones that are efficient. It's gonna be a source of inflation globally and in the United States, because it seems like there's a collective mindset in the West that as we want to go green, we don't want the price we're willing to pay is lack of consistent energy, lack of consistent pricing. And so I think that's something that we should be looking at a lot. And obviously that's playing into the European and Ukrainian situation heavily, but it's also playing into the ability to manufacture in California and Texas. And I think that's an interesting topic that people aren't really keeping their eyes on, especially if we're all supposed to buy electric cars and power them from this basically inefficient grid that doesn't have that much demand right now for electric cars.
And that's another topic we'll have you back for. So I appreciate that. John?
Well, I think we've covered the gamut here. We could have looked at maybe currency instability, which Dick and Matt have talked about and we've discussed on Odeon Capital Conversations frequently. And on that, the euro and dollar are on par now. The euro has plunged with all the deteriorating conditions in Europe and interest rates on the rise, which, to Matt's point, it's now much more attractive for a European immigrant from Ireland or Europe, mainland Europe, to come to America. They're getting a premium on the dollar, so $1 equals €1. I mean, compared to a year ago, that's just an extraordinary deal. So, if there are enough workers over there, I say bring them here to America.
For those who are interested in listening to Odeon Capital Conversations, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, all your favorite podcasts, if you have a question that you want to address to them, you can send it. You can see it scrolling at the bottom of the screen. But for those that are listening, podcast at odeoncap.com. If you're interested in going to learning a little bit more about Odeon Capital Group, go to odeoncap.com. We really appreciate you being here today. Again, this could go on a long time. You do have an open invitation anytime you want to go back, to three of you. We hoping to do that. I encourage everybody to listen to Odeon Capital Conversations, a great show, a great conversations every single week, just continuing the topics, going a lot more depth to what we talked about. And also check out John Aidan Byrne's Dig Life Deep. Another popular podcast, and don't miss my segment on there. Every week we do about a 3 to 5 minute segment on Future Shock 2.0. So some snapshots of that. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you do have any questions, please continue the conversation in the comments, and we'll make sure that Dick, Matt, and John will respond to those. I appreciate it. Don't forget our regular shows are 1 p.m. every Wednesday. We do a live stream. Today we're talking about the future of leadership, and thank you, Matt, for setting that up very much.
Thank you.
Please stay safe. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, thank you.